So today I wanted to talk about these new allegations against Bernie Sanders that he is an anti-Semite. Now, I was on the Humanist Report talking about the after of the 2019 election in the UK, and I was talking about the Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitism things, and I said if Bernie wasn't a Jew, there is no doubt in my mind he would also be smeared as an anti-Semite. Now, it turns out there is now a campaign by Democrats to smear, I'm pretty sure, one of, if not only the only Jewish candidate in the running for president. I'm sorry if I've, left someone out, but I haven't heard of any prominent people. So there's a Twitter page that's come up that has said it's Democrats against anti-Semitism. So it's apparently it's Democratic insiders, because I saw a lady called Nira Tandin, who's like a prominent person, follow this account straight away, and people pointed that out. And sorry if I just muted the chat, I just want to concentrate quick. So I'm going to read out some tweets. I can't show them on screen because I'm just doing a quick live stream. But the first tweet I want to read, it says, Sanders may be ethnically Jewish, but his rhetoric, voting history and associations have not reflected the values of a friend of Jewish people, but rather the values of a coddler of anti-Semitic, racist and sexist bullies and villains. So they're already saying Bernie isn't really a Jew because he's friends with certain people. That seems pretty anti-Semitic already. And I'm going to get into other things, and it's clear they have weaponized anti-Semitism, but in their weaponization of anti-Semitism, they are just really using anti-Semitism as an attack method. So another tweet saying, before we start this thread, we must clarify that being Jewish does not excuse one from anti-Semitism or connotations with hatred. Bernie supporters who cry but he's Jewish as a defence, do they believe Stephen Miller and Max Nahum are anti-Semites? I don't know who these people are, presumably people who aren't very nice. Now, this whole Twitter thread is basically crap. It's basically, if you go against the Israeli government, you're an anti-Semite. It says, Bernie Sanders criticising Netanyahu for a disproportionate response to attacks from Gaza is anti-Semitic somehow. And here's another one, right? In 1971, while giving a speaking, I don't know what this means, speaking outside a synagogue, Sanders stated his support for no guns for Israel just 2 years before the Yom Kippur War, where Israel came close to destruction, only surviving from American arms and aid shipments. Now, this is totally disingenuous, right? It's just talking about before the Yom Kippur War. The context is, in 1967, Israel crushed the Arab countries without much support from the Americans. Virtually none. They were using old British weapons and some Sherman tanks from World War II. They were using the leftovers from World War II, and they crushed the Arabs. The only reason they came close to destruction in the Yom Kippur War is because they didn't take the signs that the Arabs were gearing up for another assault on Israel seriously. They had a lot of hubris from their massive victory in 1967. Bernie Sanders saying, let's not arm Israel, one of the most powerful countries in the world, the dominant military power in the Middle East, let's not give them more weapons, is anti-Semitic. How ridiculous is this logic? And this is Dems against anti-Semitism. Now you can see, because I think this is done in a worse way than the British way, because in our media, in our press, at least it was a bit more sophisticated where you can make people believe it. This is so blatantly, if you're against Israel, apparently you're an anti-Semite. Now, Netanyahu just said the international, was it criminal court or people investigating human rights, he said they were anti-Semitic because they said they're going to look more into stuff that's happening in Gaza and see the Israeli human rights abuses. And Netanyahu was saying that was anti-Semitic as well. So this is what I mean by weaponized anti-Semitism. It's just, if you criticize Israel, if you criticize Western foreign policy involving Israel, apparently you hate Jews or you buy into racial stereotypes about Jews. Now, I think the overall discussion about anti-Semitism is way too nuanced to have by the mainstream media because they are way too stupid. For example, right, anti-Zionism. Would you get many people on the left calling themselves anti-Zionists in, I guess, a mainstream political context? You wouldn't, would you? Because they have successfully made anti-Zionism seem like anti-Semitism. Now, the ironic thing is, anti-Zionism, a lot of Israelis aren't Zionists. In fact, most of the founders of Israel weren't Zionists. They were mainly secular Jews from Eastern Europe, and a lot of them were atheists as well. They were just ethnically Jewish. And then as time went on, especially after the Six-Day War in 1967, the Zionists came to power a bit more. It really helped fuel this movement. And there's a certain rabbi who mixed Orthodox Judaism with Zionism, because that's another thing. Orthodox Jews didn't traditionally support the Zionists. And that is the nuance you can't have in the mainstream media, because they can't comprehend these things. People aren't smart enough, and people don't know the history of Israel, of the region, of the Jewish people enough to have this conversation. That there are multiple different factors and factions in Israel itself. The founding of Israel wasn't by Zionists, and if you're anti-Zionist, that just means you reject Zionist claim that Israel should be the territory which they say. So Zionists think Israel should be a lot bigger than it is at the moment, and they think it should keep expanding. Zionists make up a lot of the settlers in places like the West Bank and Gaza. They're the people who really push the borders of Israel. That's Zionists, really. They believe in this great, kingdom of Zion and everything. So that's not what a lot of Israelis believe themselves, and it's just, like I'm saying, too nuanced to have that discussion. But let's keep it real. Bernie Sanders, his family died in the Holocaust. Most of his father's family died in the Holocaust, and you're calling a guy whose family were exterminated by the most anti-Semitic group in history, you're calling him an anti-Semite because he says one of the most powerful military nations in the world now, and at the time in 1971 in the Middle East, shouldn't get more weapons shipments from the United States. Apparently that is... The thread went on and said, Bernie Sanders' support for Jesse Jackson, who ran for president, makes him an anti-Semite because Jesse Jackson has said some controversial things about Jews once. Now, is Bernie Sanders meant to comb through every single thing someone has said before endorsing them for something? This always happens, and if it's really controversial, of course you take away your endorsement, and the stuff with Cenk Uygur lately has been a bit ridiculous. But of course, he can't, watch everything he says, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people, I'd be surprised if people like Obama maybe didn't like Jesse Jackson, and I'm sure Obama has associated with Jesse Jackson as well. So this whole Dems against anti-Semitism is ridiculous, and what it is showing you is that they've seen how it worked in the UK. They've seen how Jeremy Corbyn was just getting hammered with this stuff constantly, even though this guy has never ever said anything anti-Semitic, right? But he was constantly called an anti-Semite, despite the Conservative Party in this country being filled with anti-Semites, being filled with people who talk about cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism is literally Nazi propaganda that was used to crush Jews and crush leftists, and they use it to justify the Holocaust. People in the Tory party use this terminology, but of course it's only the Labour Party apparently that anti-Semitic, and it's an attack that has been made very successful in the UK, and it works. People think Jeremy Corbyn's a racist for some reason, and it's because he challenges Israel's human rights abuses. And of course Britain is responsible for the founding of modern Israel, the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate of Palestine, literally given all of them arms during the first war with the Arabs, and constantly backing them the whole time. So when you challenge the foreign policy apparatus in this country or America, of course there's going to be a pushback. Now, weaponized anti-Semitism is what we're talking about here, and it's like what Netanyahu uses. It's what the Israeli lobby say to people. Say, Israel, what you're doing is not okay. You're, human rights abuses constantly against either the Palestinians, the Syrians, the Lebanese. You constantly do this, and when we call you out, you just talk about anti-Semitism, and that's not the way it works. And the thing is, I think, personally, I've seen some pretty disturbing comments on the left sometimes, and about Israel in particular. I don't always appreciate some of the language used, because I think it's a dangerous road to go down, especially as someone who obviously has studied a lot about Israel and studied a lot about the history of the Jews. That doesn't mean I agree with anything they're doing at the moment. It doesn't mean I agree with what they did in 1948 and what they did in 1967. I'm reading a book at the moment, and it's just awful what they're doing. That they were bombing refugee camps because they said there was Palestinian terrorists in them. They would bomb some of the biggest refugee camps in the world at that time, just after they expelled all these Palestinian people from places like the West Bank and Gaza. It's totally awful, and it makes me sad reading this, because if anyone should know a history of being outcast and kicked out of land and oppression, it should be, the Jewish people. But in this book, reading what the Israelis were doing to the Palestinians, and it's a more nuanced conversation, because obviously it's not all Israelis. Not all Israelis believe in Zionism. Not all Israelis believe in this type of, ethnic cleansing and everything. But it's sad to see all this stuff, and that's the conversation we should be having. And all this stuff about anti-Semitism and how the centrists, Democrats, I saw Democrats talking about how it's great that the UK voted Boris Johnson because they didn't vote for an anti-Semite like Jeremy Corbyn. Make no mistake, no one is genuine in their belief that Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn are anti-Semites. And it's ridiculous, so please reject it. It's not saying there isn't leftist anti-Semitism. I think there is. I've talked about it in the Labour Party. I've talked about how sometimes you get mixed in with groups like that. I've talked about some Islamic groups in the Labour Party using anti-Semitic language, basically talking about ethnically cleansing Israel by moving all the population to America, things like that. And I think people can do better. Even Ilhan Omar, which I don't think she's anti-Semitic, but she could be a bit more careful. The first thing she said about the money and everything, to be honest, I don't think that was that bad, but I can understand how it can be taken that way. But she got dogpiled by centrists like Chelsea Clinton and Nancy Pelosi and totally thrown under the bus. And that's who the centrists will side with. They don't actually care about anti-Semitism. And that's the problem. Who is fueling anti-Semitism at the moment? It's the right wing. You don't see any leftists going around shooting up synagogues, do you? Can you please give me an example when that's happened? It's happened multiple times in the last couple of years with right-wingers, especially in America. That's the group who are anti-Semites. Those are the the Tories are emboldening fascists. The Republicans, in my opinion, are a fascist party. They're emboldening neo-Nazis who do hate Jews, and they actually will attack synagogues and will attack Jews. Whereas I think leftist anti-Semitism obviously is bad, but it's rooted in this one issue, the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. While the right-wing anti-Semitism is this broader thing about cultural Marxism where the Jews are undermining Western civilization, and that's why they attack them. So the context is completely different. But again, we can't have this conversation about anti-Semitism because it's like, if you didn't want to give the Israelis weapons in the 70s, you're an anti-Semite, according to Democrats Against Anti-Semitism on Twitter. And in the UK, the BBC just repeating lots of attacks from Zionist people. And we don't understand the UK. If you said to someone, what's a Zionist? They wouldn't understand. They might just say that's an Israeli. But it's different. Like I'm saying, Israeli does not mean Zionist. And there are many different types of Israelis. There are Israelis who are against the occupation, for example. There are decent people in Israel. It's not all there, not all Zionists. And I know some leftists would maybe even paint them as, but it's a nuanced conversation like anything. But at the end of the day, to end this video, anti-Semitism on the left is a problem, but it's way overblown, and it's a massive problem historically on the right wing, who have been the main tormentors of the Jews throughout history. The Nazis weren't left wing, they were right wing, weren't they? All the crusaders who slaughtered Jews on the way to Holy Land, what do you call that sort of stuff? It's not left wing, is it? All the pogroms against Jews, all the countries they were kicked out of throughout history, who was doing this? It wasn't left-wing people. And when the Jews joined left-wing movements in Russia, for example, what was the response of the right wing? Oh, the Jews are behind the communist revolution so they can subvert Western ideals and they can take over the world. And we're going to pretend there is some sort of equivalency between leftist anti-Semitism and right-wing anti-Semitism. And it's so frustrating that because we can't have this nuanced debate, the right wing have hijacked it, and Donald Trump, who literally says anti-Semitic things all the time, is calling people like Ilhan Omar and AOC anti-Semitic for supporting the Palestinians. And that's the crazy world we live in right now. Whereas someone like Rachel Riley, who's a prominent Jewish TV host in the UK, says, well done Britain for voting Tory, then Tommy Robinson and the leader of the EDL tell everyone to go join the Tory party. Again, what's more dangerous? a guy like Jeremy Corbyn who's never been anti-Semitic, or a party that enables the most hateful right-wingers who do hate Jews, really, really hate Jews, and they believe in the same ideology that the Nazis believed and general fascists have believed for the last, I guess, 100+ years. Anyway, that is my general take on it. Sorry if it's a bit rambly, but it's just been something that's been bugging me lately. So if you want to find me on social media, please follow me at Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at the Tabernacle. Just search it on any social media, I'll probably come up. On Reddit, please check out my account, and that is just u/Tommy Cahill 1995. Check out my Patreon, check out my WordPress. I'm going to write some more WordPress stuff lately. I actually wrote an article the other day about Philip K. Dick and Blade Runner and everything, so please go check that out. And yeah, I'm going to make a video tomorrow on Christmas Eve, and then I'll be done for a couple of days, and I hope everyone has a good Christmas holidays. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.